Hello and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to The Secret Speech by Tom Rob Smith. 5 months later. Moscow, 20 October. Philip broke the bread, studying the way in which the still warm dough pulled apart, stretching it briefly before tearing it into ragged strips. He dug out a chunk and placed it on his tongue, chewing slowly. The loaf was perfect, which meant the batch was perfect. He wanted to gorge himself, spreading a thick layer of butter that would soften and melt. Yet, he was unable to swallow even this modest mouthful. Standing over the bin, he spat out the sticky ball of dough. The waste of food appalled him, but he had no choice. Despite being a baker, one of the best in the city, 47-year-old Philip could only consume liquids. Persistent and untreatable stomach ulcers had plagued him for the past 10 years. His gut was pock-marked with acid-filled craters, the hidden scars of Stalin's rule, testimony to nights laying awake worrying about whether he'd been too stern to the men and women working under him. He was a perfectionist. When mistakes were made, he lost his temper. Disgruntled workers might have written a report naming him inciting bourgeois, elitist tendencies. Even today, the memory caused his gut to burn. He hurried to his table, mixing a chalk solution and gulping down the white, foul-tasting water, reminding himself that these worries belonged in the past. There were no more midnight arrests. His family was safe, and he had denounced no one. His conscience was clear. The price had been the lining of his stomach. All things considered, even for a baker and a lover of food, that price was not so high. The chalk water soothed his gut and he berated himself for dwelling on the past. The future was bright. The state was recognizing his talents. The bakery was expanding, taking over the entire building. Previously, he'd been limited to 2 floors, with the top floor designated as a button factory, a cover for a secret government ministry. Locating it above a bakery had never made sense to him. The rooms were filled with flour dust and roasted by the heat from the ovens. In truth, he wanted them gone, not because he needed the space. He'd never liked the look of the people who'd worked there. Their uniforms and cagey demeanor aggravated his stomach. Making his way to the communal stairway, he peered up at the top floor. The previous occupants had spent the past 2 days clearing out filing cabinets and office furniture. Reaching the landing, he paused by the door, noting the series of heavy locks. He tried the handle. It clicked open. Pushing on the door, he studied the gloomy space. The rooms were empty. Emboldened, he entered his new premises. Fumbling for the light switch, he saw a man slumped against the far wall. Leo sat up, blinking at the bulb overhead. The baker came into focus. A man as thin as wire. Leo's throat was dry. He coughed, getting to his feet, brushing himself down and surveying the gutted offices of the homicide department. The classified case files, evidence of the crimes he and Timur had solved, had been removed. They were being incinerated. Every trace of the work he'd done these past 3 years destroyed. The baker, whose name he didn't know, stood awkwardly. The embarrassment of a compassionate man witnessing the misfortune of a fellow citizen. Leo said, 3 years of passing each other on the stairs, and I never asked your name. I didn't want to. Worry me? Would it have? Honestly? Yes. My name is Leo. The baker offered his hand. Leo shook it. My name is Philip. 3 years and I never offered you a loaf of bread. Leaving the homicide office for the last time, Leo glanced back before shutting the door. Feeling an awful kind of lightheadedness, he followed Philip downstairs, where he was handed a round loaf, still warm, the crust golden. He broke the bread, biting into it. Philip studied his reaction carefully. Realizing his opinion was being sought, Leo finished the mouthful and said, "This is the best bread I've ever eaten." It was true, and it was true. Philip smiled. He asked, "What did you do up there? Why all the secrecy?" Before Leo had a chance to reply, the question was retraced. "Ignore me. I should mind my own business." Still eating, Leo ignored the retraction. "I was in charge of a specialist division of the militia, a homicide department." Philip was silent. He didn't understand. Leo added, "We investigated murders." "Was there much work?" Leo gave a small nod. "More than you might think." Accepting another loaf to take home, as well as the remains of the one he'd started, Leo turned to leave. Philip called out, trying to end on a positive note. "It gets hot here in the summer. You must be pleased to be moving to another location." Leo looked down, studying the pattern of flower footprints. "The department isn't moving. It's closing down." "What about you?" Leo looked up. "I'm to join the KGB." Same day. The Serbsky Institute was a modest-sized building with curved steel balconies around the top floor windows, more like a block of attractive apartments than a hospital. Raiza paused, as she always did at this point, 50 meters away, asking herself if she was doing the right thing. She glanced down at Elena, standing by her side, holding her hand. Her skin was supernaturally pale, as though her body were fading. She'd lost weight and was unwell with such regularity that sickness had become her usual state. Noticing Elena's scarf had come loose, Raiza crouched down, fussing over her. "We can go home. We can go home at any time." Elena remained silent, her face blank, as if no longer a real girl, but a replica created with tissue paper skin and green pebble eyes, emitting no energy of her own. Or was it the other way round? Was Raisa the replica, fussing and caring in an imitation of the things a real mother would do? Raisa kissed Elena on the cheek and, garnering no response, felt her stomach knot. She had no resilience to this indifference. Indifference that had begun when she'd knelt down, her eyes filled with tears, and whispered into Elena's ear, "Zoya is dead." Raisa had expected an outburst of grief, but Elena hadn't reacted. 5 months later, she still hadn't reacted, not in any ordinary outward sense. Raisa stood up, checking on the traffic, crossing the road and approaching the main entrance. The Serbsky Institute was a desperate measure, but she was desperate. Love wasn't going to save them. Love simply wasn't enough. Inside, stone floors, bare walls, nurses in crisp uniforms pushed steel trolleys equipped with leather restraints. Doors were bolted. Windows were barred. There could be no doubt that the Institute's reputation as the city's foremost psychiatric center was a point of notoriety rather than acclaim. A treatment center for dissidents. Political opponents were admitted for insulin-induced comas and the latest in progenic and shock therapy. It was an improbable place to seek assistance for a 7-year-old girl. In their discussions, Leo had repeatedly stated his opposition to psychiatric help. Many of those he'd arrested for political crimes had been sent into a psychiatric, a hospital such as this. While Leo agreed, as indeed he had to, that there might be good doctors working within a brutal system, he didn't believe that the risk in searching for those men and women warranted the potential gain from their expertise. Declaring yourself unwell was tantamount to positioning yourself in the fringes of society. Not a place any parent or guardian, not a place where any parent or guardian would want for their child. Yet his stance seemed less like caution and more like mulish stubbornness, a blind determination to be the one that fixed his family even as it crumbled in his hands. Raisa was no doctor, but she understood that Elena's sickness was as threatening as a physical ailment. As a physical ailment. She was dying. It was primitive to hope the problem would merely pass. The woman behind the front desk glanced up, recognizing them from previous visits. "I'm here to see Dr. Stavsky." Working behind Leo's back, talking to friends, colleagues, she'd secured an introduction with Stavsky. Despite a career in treating dissidents with all that entailed, Stavsky believed in the value of psychiatry beyond the political sphere and disapproved of the excesses of punitive treatments. He was motivated by a desire to heal, and he'd agreed to examine Elena without making any official record. Raisa trusted him much as a person lost at sea would put their faith in a drifting plank of wood. She had little choice. Upstairs, summoned in, Dr. Stavsky crouched down in front of Elena. "Elena, how are you?" Elena didn't reply. "Do you remember my name?" Elena didn't reply. Stavsky stood up, addressing Raisa in a whisper. "This week? No change, not a word. Stavsky directed Elena to the scales. Please take off your shoes. Elena didn't respond. Raisa knelt down, taking her shoes off, guiding Elena onto the scales. Stavsky peered at the display, noting her weight. He tapped his pen against his pad, running his eyes across the numbers accumulated these past weeks. He stepped back, perching on his desk. Raisa moved forward to help Elena off the scales, but Stavsky stopped her, indicating that she leave Elena where she was. They waited. Elena remained on the scales, facing the wall, doing nothing. 2 minutes became 5 minutes, became 10 minutes, and Elena still hadn't moved. Finally, Stavsky indicated that Raisa should help Elena off the scales. Fighting back tears, Raisa finished tying Elena's laces and stood up, about to ask a question, only to see Stavsky on the telephone. He hung up, placing his pad on the desk. She didn't know how or why, but she knew she'd been betrayed. Before she could react, he said, "You came to me for help. It is my view that Elena needs professional, full-time supervision." 2 male orderlies entered the room, closing the door behind them like a trap slamming shut. Raisa wrapped her arms around Elena. Stavsky slowly approached. "I have arranged for her to be admitted to a hospital in the city of Kazan. I know the staff at the hospital well." Raisa shook her head, in disbelief as much to rebut his proposal. "This is no longer up to you, Raisa. The decision has been made in the interest of this young girl. You are not her mother. The state has appointed you her guardian. The state is taking back guardianship." "Doctor," she spat the word out with contempt. "You are not taking her." Stavsky moved closer, whispering, "I will tell Elena that she is going with these nurses to Kazan. I will tell her that she will not see you again. I am quite certain that she will not react. She will walk out of this room with those 2 strangers, and she won't even look back. If she does, will you then believe that you cannot keep her? If she does, will you then believe that you cannot help her?" "I refuse to accept that test." Ignoring Raisa, Stavsky crouched down, speaking slowly and clearly. "Elena, you are going to be taken to a special hospital. They will try and make you better. It is possible that you may never see Raisa again. However, I will make sure that you are well looked after. These men will help you. If you do not wish to go, if you wish to stay, if you wish to remain here with Raisa, all you have to do is say so. All you have to do is say no. Elena, do you hear me? All you have to say is no." Elena did not reply. Same day. Inessa, Timur's widow, opened the door. Leo entered the apartment. For several months after returning from KOLYMA, he'd expected that Timur would appear from the kitchen, explaining that he hadn't been killed. He'd survived and found a way home. It was simply impossible to imagine this home without Timur. He'd been his happiest here, surrounded by his family. However, the designation of accommodation was a process without compassion. According to the system's calculations, Timur's death meant, quite inarguably, that the family needed less space. Furthermore, their modern apartment had been a perk of his job. Inessa worked in a textile factory, and the men and women she worked alongside made do with far more modest living arrangements. Using his blood, his influence, Leo had fought to keep the family where they were, requesting that Frol Panin intervene. Perhaps feeling a sense of responsibility for Timur's death, Panin had agreed. Yet to Leo's surprise, Inessa had been tempted by the prospect of moving out. Every room was steeped in memories of her husband. They left her breathless, so sad she could barely function. Only when Leo had shown her the apartment block where she would be relocated to, a single room, shared facilities, thin walls, did she relent, and only then because of her two sons. Had she been alone, she would have moved out that same day. Leo gave Inessa a hug. Separating, she accepted the loaf of bread. Where did this come from? The bakery underneath our offices. Timur never brought home bread. The people who worked there were too scared to talk to us. But not now? No. Like the movement of a shadow, sadness passed across Inessa's face. The homicide department had been Timur's too. It was gone. Her two sons, Efim, 10 years old, and Vadim, 8, hurried out of their bedroom to greet Leo. Though Timur had died working for Leo, his sons bore him no ill will. On the contrary, they were pleased by his visits. They understood that Leo had loved Timur and that their father had loved Leo. All the same, for Leo, their affection was a fragile pleasure, certain one day to break. They did not yet know the details of what had happened. They did not yet know their father had died trying to put right the wrongs of Leo's past. Inessa ran her hand through Ephraim's hair as he spoke excitedly about his schoolwork, the sports teams he was playing for. As the elder son, Timur's watch would be given to him when he turned 18. Leo had replaced the cracked glass and the interior mechanisms, which he'd kept for himself, unable to throw it away, occasionally taking it out and resting it on the palm of his hand. Inessa had not yet decided what story she would tell Efim about the watch's origins, whether to lie about it being a treasured family heirloom. That decision was for another day. Addressing Leo, she said, "Will you eat with us?" Leo was comfortable here. He shook his head. "I have to go home." Arriving back at his apartment, he discovered that Raiza and Elena weren't home. The security officers on duty remarked that the pair had left for school in the morning, observing nothing out of the ordinary. Unaware of any plans, he couldn't imagine what Raiza was doing out at this time of night with Elena. No clothes had been packed, no bags had been taken. Phoning his parents, they didn't have any answers. His fear wasn't that Fraera was involved. Zoya's murder had been her last act of revenge against state security personnel. After a 5-month absence, he doubted Fraera would return. There was no need. Leo had been hurt exactly as she desired. Hearing the noise of someone approach, he rushed to the hallway, throwing open the door. Raiza staggered forward, catching the door frame as if drunk. Leo supported her, taking her weight. He checked the corridor. It was empty. Where's Elena? She's gone. Her eyes rolled, her head slumped. Leo carried her into the bathroom, placing her under the shower, running it cold. Why are you drunk? Raisa gasped, shaken awake by the shock of the water. Not drunk, drugged. Leo turned the shower off, wiping Raisa's hair out of her eyes, sitting her on the side of the bath. Her bloodshot eyes were no longer rolling shut. She stared at the puddles forming around her shoes, her speech no longer slurred. I knew you'd disagree. You took her to see a doctor? Leo, when someone you love is sick, you seek help. He said it would be unofficial, no paperwork. Where? Serbsky. At the sound of the name, Serbsky, Leo went numb. Many of the men and women he'd arrested had been sent there for treatment. Raisa began to cry. Leo, he sent her away. Dumb incomprehension. Then rage. What is the doctor's name? Raisa shook her head. You can't save her, Leo. What is his name? You can't save her! Leo raised his hand, arching it back, ready to strike her across the face. In a flash, diverting his anger, he grabbed the mirror from the wall and smashed it in the sink. The shards cut his skin, drawing blood, red lines rolling around his wrists, down his arms. Leo dropped to the floor, bloody mirror fragments scattered around him. Taking a towel, Raisa sat beside Leo, pressing it against his injured hand. You think I didn't fight? You think I didn't try and stop them? They sedated me. When I woke up, Elena was gone. Leo turned the defeat over in his mind. It was complete. His hopes of a family had been destroyed. He'd failed to save Zoya's life and failed to persuade Elena that life was worth living. 3 years of honesty and trust between himself and Raisa had been wiped out. He'd lied to her, a lie forever preserved by the calamities that had followed from it. He didn't feel any anger at Raisa for accepting Fraera's offer, for agreeing to leave him. Raisa claimed it was tactical and nothing more, a desperate bid to save Zoya. She'd taken their family's well-being into her own hands. The only mistake she'd made was waiting too long. The 3-year pretense had come to an end. He was no father, no husband, and certainly no hero. He would join the KGB. Raisa would leave him. How could she not? There would be nothing between them except the sense of loss. Each day he'd know that Fraera had been right about him. He was a man of the state. He had changed, but far more importantly, he'd changed back. He remarked, "There was a moment when I thought we had a chance." Raisa nodded. "I thought so too." Same day. Leo wasn't sure how much time had passed. They hadn't moved. Raisa by his side, the two of them on the floor, leaning against the bathtub, the tap dripping behind them. Bloop, 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 bloop. He heard the front door open, yet still he couldn't stand up. Stepan and Anna appeared at the bathroom doorway, no doubt concerned by Leo's earlier phone call. His parents had traveled over. They took in the room, seeing the blood, the smashed mirror. "What happened?" Raiza squeezed his hand. He answered, "They took Elena." Neither Stepan nor Anna said a word. Stepan helped Raiza to her feet, wrapping a towel around her, guiding her to the kitchen. Anna took Leo into the bedroom, examining the cut. She dressed the wound, behaving as she had done when he'd been a boy and had hurt himself. Finished, she sat beside Leo. He kissed her on the cheek, stood up, walked into the kitchen, stretching out his hand to Raiza. "I need your help." Frol Panin was Leo's most influential ally, but he was unavailable, out of the city. Although they weren't friends, 3 years ago, Major Grachev had supported Leo's proposal to create an autonomous homicide department. Leo had reported to him directly for the first 2 years until Grachev had stepped aside, making way for Panin. Since then, Leo had seen the major infrequently. However, a proponent of change, Grachev believed that the only way to govern was by making amends, seeking to admit and readdress, in moderation, the wrongs perpetrated by the state. With Raiza by his side, Leo knocked on Grachev's apartment door. Instinctively checking the length of the communal corridor. It was late, but they couldn't wait until morning, fearful that if their efforts lost momentum, a sense of crushing despondency would return. The door opened. Accustomed to seeing the major in a pristine uniform, it was a shock to see him scruffily dressed, his glasses smudged with fingerprints, his hair wild. Normally formal and restrained, he embraced Leo affectionately, as though reunited with a lost brother. He bowed affectionately before Raiza. "Come in!" Inside there were boxes on the floor, items being packed. Leo asked, "You're moving?" Grachev shook his head. "No, I'm being moved. Out of the city. Far away. I couldn't even tell you where. Really, I couldn't. They did tell me, but I'd never heard of the place. Somewhere north, I think. North and cold and dark, just to make the point even clearer." His sentences were tumbling one after the other. Leo tried to focus him. "What point is that? That I am no longer a man in favor, no longer the man for the job. Any job, it seems, other than running a small office in a small town. You remember this punishment, Leo? Raiza? Exile. You both suffered it yourself." Raiza asked, "Where is your wife?" "She left me." Preempting their condolences, Grachev added, "By mutual agreement. We have a son. He has ambitions. My relocation would ruin his chances. We have to be partial. We have to be practical." Grachev stuffed his hands into his pockets. "If you came for my help, I am afraid my situation has deteriorated." Raiza glanced at Leo, her eyes asking whether it was worth explaining their predicament. Grachev spotted her reaction. "Talk to me. If not because I can help, then as conversation between like-minded friends." Embarrassed, Raiza blushed. "I am sorry." "Think nothing of it." She quickly explained. Elena, our adopted daughter, has been taken from us and admitted to a psychiatric hospital in Kazan. She never recovered from the murder of her sister. I had arranged for her to see a doctor on an unofficial basis. Grashev shook his head, interjecting. Nothing is unofficial. Raisa tensed. The doctor promised not to make any records of her treatment. I believed him. When she didn't respond to his treatment, he committed her in order to protect himself? Raisa nodded. Grashev considered before adding as an afterthought. I fear none of us will recover from Zoya's murder. Surprised by this comment, Leo sought an explanation. None of us? I don't understand. Forgive me. It is unfair to compare the wider consequences to the grief you must feel. What wider consequences? We needn't go into that now. You're here to help Elena. Leo interrupted. No! Tell me, what wider consequences? The major perched atop a box. He looked at Raisa, then Leo. Zoya's death changed everything. Leo stared at him blankly. Grashev continued. The murder of a young girl to punish a former state security officer, along with some 15 or more retired officers hunted down and executed, several tortured. These events shook the authorities. They'd released this Vori woman from the gulags. What was her name? Leo and Raisa replied at the same time. Fraera. Who else might they have released? Many hundreds of thousands of prisoners are coming home. How will we govern if even a fraction of their number behave like her? Will her revenge start a chain reaction, culminating in the collapse of rule and order? There will be civil war once more. Our country will be ripped down the middle. This is the new fear. Steps have been taken to prevent this from happening. What steps? An air of permissiveness has crept into our society. Do you know there are authors writing satirical prose? Dudinstev has written a novel, not by bread alone. The state and officials are openly mocked in print. What follows next? We allow people to criticize? We allow people to oppose our rule? We allow people to take revenge. Authority that once was strong suddenly seems fragile. Have there been similar reprisals across the country? When I spoke about wider consequences, I wasn't merely referring to incidents within our country. There are reprisals across all the territories under our rule. Look at what happened in Poland. Riots were precipitated by Khrushchev's speech. Anti-Soviet sentiment is stirring throughout Eastern Europe, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia. Leo was shocked. The speech has traveled. The Americans have it. They have printed it in their newspapers. It has become a weapon against us. It is perceived that we have dealt ourselves a terrible blow. How are we to continue the global revolution when we confess to such murderous acts against our own people? Who would want to join our cause? Who would want to become our comrades? The major paused, wiping the sweat from his brow. Leo and Raisa were now crouching before him, like children captivated by a story. He continued. After Zoya's murder, everyone who argued for reform, including myself, was silenced. Even Khrushchev was forced to retract many of the criticisms he made in his speech. I didn't know that. You were grieving, Leo. You buried your daughter. You buried your friend. You were not paying attention to the world around you. While you mourned, a revised speech was written. Revised how? The admissions of summary executions and torture were cut. This document was published 1 month after Zoya's murder. I'm not claiming Fra Era's revenge was the only contributing factor, but those murders were important. They made a graphic case for the traditionalists. Khrushchev had no choice. A Central Committee resolution rewrote his speech. Stalin was no longer a murderer. He merely made errors. The system wasn't at fault. Any minor mistakes were Stalin's alone. It was the secret speech. Without the secrets. His mind turning these facts over, Leo remarked, "My department's failure to stop these murders was the reason they closed us down." "No, that's an excuse. They never approved of the homicide department. They never liked me for helping to create it. Your department was part of the creeping culture of permissiveness. Leo, we move too quickly. Freedoms are won slowly, bit by bit. They have to be fought for. The forces that desire change, myself included, marched too far and too fast. We were arrogant. We overreached ourselves. We underestimated those who want to protect and preserve power as it was. They've ordered me to rejoin the KGB. That would be a potent symbol. The reformed MGB agent folded back into the traditional power structures. They're using you. You must allow yourself to be used. If I were you, Leo, I would be very careful. Do not believe that they will behave any more kindly than Stalin. His spirit lives on. Not in one person, but diffused in many people. It's harder to see, but make no mistake, it is there. Outside the apartment, Leo took hold of Raiza's hands. I've been blind. BLIZHNYA, DACHA, KUNTSEVO, 20 kilometers west of Moscow. 21 October. This was Frol Panin's second visit to BLIZHNYA Dacha, one of Stalin's former residences, now open to families of the ruling elite as a retreat. The decision had been taken that the residence was not to be closed down or turned into a museum. The dacha was to remain filled with children playing, staff cooking, and the ruling elite slouched on creaking leather chairs, ice cubes clanking as they sipped their drinks. Upon Stalin's death, it had been discovered that the liquor cabinet contained bottles filled with imitation alcohol, weak tea instead of scotch, water for vodka, so that Stalin might remain sober while his ministers lost control of their tongues. No longer needed, the imitation alcohol had been poured away. Times had changed. Having eaten sparingly from a 5-course meal, picking at 3 types of bloody meat, ignoring 3 wines, Frol's social duties were finished for the night. He climbed the stairs, listening to the heavy rain. Loosening his shirt, he entered his suite. His young sons were in the room next door, put to bed by a maid. His wife was getting undressed, having excused herself from the end of the meal as was expected of the wives, enabling husbands to talk of weighty matters. An excruciating routine, since most were drunk with nothing to say. Entering the living room and shutting the door, he felt relief. The evening was over. He hated coming here, particularly with his children. To his mind, the dacha was a place where people lost their lives. No matter how many children now played in the grounds, no matter how loudly they laughed, those ghosts remained. Frol turned off the living room lights, heading toward the bedroom and calling out to his wife. "Nina!" Nina was on the edge of the bed. Seated beside her was Leo. Soaked by rain, his trousers were mud-stained, his hand was bandaged, and the bandages were soaked too. Dirty water seeping from his clothes had formed a circular stain on the bed sheets. In Leo's face, Frol observed stillness, bellying an enormous kinetic force inside, tremendous anger bubbling under a thin sheet of glass. Frol calculated quickly. "Why don't I sit beside you, Leo, instead of my wife?" Without waiting for a reply, Frol gestured for Nina to approach. She tentatively stood up, moving slowly. Leo didn't stop her. She whispered to Frol. "What is going on?" Frol replied, making sure Leo could also hear. "You have to understand that Leo has experienced a terrible shock. He is grief-stricken and not thinking straight. To break into a dacha could result in his execution. I'm going to work very hard to see that doesn't happen." He paused, addressing Leo directly. "May my wife check on my children?" Leo's eyes sparked. "Your children are safe. You have some nerve asking me that." "You're right, Leo. I apologize. Your wife stays here." "Very well." Nina sat on a chair in the corner. Frol continued. "This is concerning Elena, I take it? You could have come to my office, made an appointment. I would have arranged for her release. I had nothing to do with her admission to hospital. I was appalled to hear about it. Completely unnecessary. The doctor was acting on his own authority. He believed he was doing the right thing." Frol paused. "Why don't we call for some drinks?" Leo emptied his pockets. "I pose no threat to you. I haven't brought a gun. If you called for your guards, they'd arrest me." Nina stood up, about to shout for help. Frol indicated that she remained silent. He asked, "Tell me then, Leo, what do you want?" "Was Fraera working for you?" "No." Frol sat down beside him. "We were working together." Leo had expected Frol Panin to deny it, but there was no reason for him to lie. Powerless, Leo could do as little with the truth as he could do with a denial. Panin stood up, taking off his suit jacket, unbuttoning some of his shirt buttons. "Fraera came to me. I didn't know who she was. I didn't have any knowledge of Vori in Moscow. They'd always been an irrelevance. She broke into my apartment and was waiting for me. She knew everything about you. Not only that, she knew about the struggle between the traditionalists in the party and the reformists. She proposed that we work together and claimed that our aims overlapped. she would be granted the freedom needed to take revenge on those involved in her arrest. In exchange, we could exploit that series of murders, use it for our own purposes, creating a sense of fear. She never cared about Lazar. Panin shook his head. She saw Lazar as someone from her former life, nothing more. He was a pretext. She wanted you to go to the Gulag as a punishment, to force you to see the world you sent so many people to. From our point of view, we needed you out of the way. The homicide department was the only independent investigative force. Fraera required a free hand. Once you and Timur were gone, she could kill as she pleased. The KGB never looked for her. We made sure they never got close. The officers you appointed to run the homicide department in my absence were our men. They did as they were told, Leo. You almost managed to stop the murder of the patriarch. That murder was a vital part of our plan. His death shocked the entire regime. Had you remained in the city, Fraera would have been forced to kill you. For her own reasons, she didn't want to. She preferred to send you away, to stretch out your punishment into something altogether more awful. And you agreed? Panin seemed puzzled by that statement of the obvious. Yes, I agreed. I removed Major Grachev and positioned myself as your closest advisor in order to help make the right decision. In order to help you make the right decisions. The decisions we wanted you to make. I arranged the paperwork that enabled you to break into Gulag 57. You and Fraera planned this. We were waiting for the right moment. When I heard Khrushchev's speech, I knew it was time. We had to act. The changes were going too far. Leo stood up, walking toward Nina. Concerned, Panin also stood up, tense. Leo put his hand on her shoulder. Isn't this how we used to interrogate our suspects? A loved one present, the implications clear. If the suspect failed to give the correct answer, the loved one would be punished? I'm answering your questions, Leo. You authorized the murder of men and women who served the state? Many of them were murderers themselves. In my position, they would have done the same thing. What position is that? Leo, these hasty reforms, more than Stalin's crimes, more even than the West, pose the greatest threat to our nation. Fraera's murders were an illustration of the future. The millions we as a ruling party have wronged would revolt just as the prisoners on board the Stary Bolshevik rose up, just as they did in that Gulag. Those scenes would be repeated in every city, in every province. You haven't noticed, Leo, but we are engaged in a silent battle for our nation's survival. It has nothing to do with whether or not Stalin went too far. He did. Of course he did. But we cannot change the past, and our authority is based on the past. We must behave as we have always behaved, with an iron rule. We cannot admit mistakes and hope our citizens will love us all the same. It is unlikely we will ever be loved. So, we must be feared. Leo removed his hand from Nina's shoulder. You have what you wanted. The secret speech has been retracted. You don't need Fraera anymore. Let me have her. Give me my revenge as you gave it to her. You should have no compunction about betraying her. You've betrayed everyone else. Leo, I understand that you have no reason to trust me, but my advice is this. Forget Fraera. Forget that she exists. Let me arrange for Elena to be released from hospital. You and Raisa can move out of the city, away from all these memories. I'll find you another job, whatever you want. Leo turned face to face with Panin. She's still working for you? Yes, she is. On what? That speech weakened us domestically and internationally. In response, we need a clear show of our strength. For this reason, we're working to manufacture an uprising abroad in parts of the Soviet bloc. Small, symbolic uprisings which we will crush mercilessly. The KGB has established a series of foreign cells attempting to stimulate disorder, scattered across Eastern Europe. Fraera is in charge of one of those cells. Where? Take my advice, Leo. This is not a fight you can win. Where is she? You cannot beat her. How could she hurt me more? Because, Leo, your daughter, Zoya, is alive. Soviet-controlled Eastern Europe, Hungary, Budapest, 22 October. Zoya walked as fast as she could, on her way to the Opera House, the drop point for her illicit cargo. Her pockets were brimming with bullets, 100 rounds in total, each tip etched with a cross to ensure the bullet quartered upon entering the body. Though it was a cold night, she felt hot and flustered, wearing a knee-length coat tied at the waist. A black beret slanted across her forehead. She looked older than 14. A black beret slanted across her forehead. She looked older than 14, more like a Hungarian student than a Russian orphan. Nervous, clammy with perspiration, she snatched the beret off her head, pressing it into her pocket, atop the bullets, muffling their telltale jingle. Reaching the main boulevard, Stalin Ut, not far from the Opera House, Zoya paused, checking that no one was following. Taking her by surprise, someone grabbed her shoulders. She turned around, finding herself surrounded by a group of men, convinced that they were the Hungarian secret police. One man kissed her cheek, pressing a sheet of paper into her hand. It was a poster of some kind. The men were talking in rapid bursts. Having been in the city for 4 months, she picked up only a handful of Hungarian phrases. Judging by their attire, the men were students or artisans, not officers, and she relaxed. Even so, she had to be careful. If they realized she was Russian, there was no knowing how they'd behave. She smiled meekly, hoping they'd consider her shy and let her go. They were hardly interested in her anyway. Unraveling another poster and plastering it to the front of a shop window, Zoya pulled away, hurrying to her destination. Arriving at the Opera House, climbing the stone stairs, she hid behind the pillars, out of view from the street. She checked her watch, a gift from Fraera. She was early, and she pulled back into the shadows, nervously waiting for her contact to show up. This was the first task she'd handled alone. Normally, she worked with Malish. They were a team, a partnership forged in Moscow 5 months ago. Taken from her cell that night, Zoya had been certain Fra Era was going to execute her in order to punish Leo. Facing death as she had done only days earlier, she had discovered that she was no longer indifferent to the prospect. She'd cried out, "Malish!" Fra Era had set her down on the ground. "Why did you call his name?" "Because I like him." Fra Era had smiled, a smile turning into a laugh. Slowly at first, then getting louder. Her Vori laughing beside her. A chorus of scorn. Zoya had blushed, her face burning with shame. Humiliated, she'd run at Fra Era, arms raised, fists clenched. Before she'd landed a blow, Fra Era had caught hold of her hand. "I will give you a chance. One chance. If you fail, I will kill you. If you succeed, you will become one of us. You and Malish can remain together." Driven to the middle of Bolshoi Krasnokholmsky Bridge, that night had unfolded as Fra Era predicted. Leo and Raisa had been waiting on the bridge, soaked by the rain. They had climbed into the front of the car, separated by a steel grate. Zoya had witnessed Raisa's face crumple with distress. In that moment, Zoya had experienced doubts, but it had been too late to change her mind. Pressing her hands against the grate, she'd bidden farewell to her unhappy life, a decision that necessitated leaving her little sister behind. She'd feigned resistance as she'd been dragged out of the car. Out of sight, she'd voluntarily climbed into the sack. Already inside, Malish had been waiting for her. The sack had been carried to the edge of the bridge, while Zoya had continued to make a show of struggling until the Vori had struck her, entirely unexpected. She'd collapsed. The sack had been zipped shut. In the darkness, Malish had wrapped his arms around her, supporting her as they'd been dropped. Briefly, mid-air in each other's arms, in the darkness, then they'd crashed into the water. Steel weights had carried the sack straight down. The waterproof, waxed canvas had shrouded them in a minute's worth of air. The steel had thudded against the riverbed, toppling Malish and Zoya to the side. Working blind, Malish had flicked open his knife and cut through the material. Freezing water had rushed in as he'd sliced a gash, filling the sack in an instant. Malish had helped Zoya out. Holding hands, they kicked their way back up to the surface, swimming to the riverbank. They'd watched the final moments on the bridge as Leo and Raisa had jumped, mistakenly believing that they were going to save her. Struggling upstream against the torrent, Zoya and Malish had pulled themselves along the high stone sides of the riverbank, reaching the timber jetty. They'd been reunited with Fra Era as she listened to Raisa's and Leo's distant, desperate cries, savoring their grief for a child they thought was lost. There was a man lingering at the bottom of the opera house steps. Zoya emerged from her hiding place. The man checked up and down, Stalin ut, before moving toward her. Zoya emptied her pockets, filling his satchel with the customized bullets. He pulled out a handgun, loading the chamber. The bullets were a match. He filled the other chambers while Zoya continued to transfer the bullets from her pockets to his bag. Finished, the man hid his gun, dropping his head in a gesture of thanks before hurrying down the steps. Zoya counted to 20 before setting off again, making her way back home. It was odd to think of the city as home. 5 months ago, Zoya had known nothing of Hungary, except that it was a loyal ally of the Soviet Union, part of a brotherhood of nations, a front-line state in the global revolution. Fraera had corrected this classroom propaganda, explaining that Hungary had never been given any choice. Liberated from fascist forces, it had been occupied and placed under Soviet rule. Hungary was a sovereign nation with no sovereignty. The leader for many years, Matyas Rákosi, had been appointed by Stalin and had imitated his master exactly, torturing and executing civilians. He'd created the AVH, the Hungarian secret police, modeled on the Soviet secret police. The language and location was different, but the terror had been the same. With Stalin's death, the struggle had begun to reform. Electrified by dreams of independence, Zoya was a foreigner here, an outsider. With Stalin's death, the struggle had begun to reform. Electrified by dreams of independence. Zoya was a foreigner here, an outsider. Yet not since her parents had died had she felt more at home here, in a country that, like her, had been adopted against its will. Relieved that the night was almost over and that she was no longer carrying bullets, Zoya swung down Nagi Mezo Ut. Directly ahead, a small crowd had gathered. At its center were the same men she'd bumped into previously, sitting on each other's shoulders in order to transform the entire height of a streetlight into a totem pole of poster text. A woman in the crowd saw Zoya approach. In her 30s, stout and stocky, the woman was drunk. Her cheeks were red. Wrapped around her like an enormous shawl was the Hungarian flag. Zoya glanced at the street light and pulled the same crumpled poster from her pocket, as if to say, I know. Not content with this gesture, the woman pulled her into the throng, talking good-naturedly, nothing of which Zoya could understand. The woman began to dance and sing. The others joined in, all of them knowing the words except for Zoya. She could only laugh and smile in the hope that they would eventually let her go. Keen to leave before they noticed she wasn't speaking, she attempted to extricate herself from the stranger's affections. But the woman was no longer flushed with happiness. A van had swung off the main boulevard and was accelerating toward them. It skidded to a halt. 2 AVH officers jumped out. The crowd closed ranks around the street light as though it were territory to be defended. One of the officers grabbed the flag, which was wrapped around Zoya, pulling it free, holding it contemptuously. It was only now that Zoya noticed the communist hammer and sickle in the center had been cut out. A gaping hole in the middle of the material. The AVH officer sounded like a barking dog. Zoya unable to understand the word he was saying. He searched Zoya's pockets, infuriated by her silence. Finding nothing apart from the beret, he threw it back at her. A single bullet trapped inside the material fell to the street. The officer picked up the bullet, staring directly at Zoya. Before he could speak, the drunk woman reached down and grabbed the beret from the street, placing it proudly on her head. It looked ridiculous, too small for her. The officer turned to the woman and Zoya didn't need to speak Hungarian to understand that he was asking if the beret belonged to her. The officer raised the bullet to the woman's face. Did this also belong to her? He must have asked. In reply, she spat in his face. While the officer wiped the glob of phlegm from his cheek, the woman flicked Zoya a glance. Run! Cutting a diagonal across the street, Zoya ran, mid-sprint. She turned around, peering over her shoulder. She saw the AVH officer swing a punch, connecting with the side of the woman's face, as if the punch had connected with her own face. Zoya's legs crumbled and she collapsed, her hands scraping across the ground, rolling onto her back. Looking over the tips of her shoes, she saw the woman fall. A man jumped forward, grabbing the officer. A second man joined the fray, scrambling to her feet. Zoya lurched into another run, this time reaching the side street. Out of sight, she didn't stop. She had to get help. Fraera would know what to do. Fraera and her vori occupied several apartments within a small courtyard set back from Rakogzi Ut. Accessed by a narrow passageway, the apartments couldn't be seen or spied upon from the main street. Reaching them, Zoya stopped running. No one was following her. In the unlit passageway, relieved to be off the street, she felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Malish. They hugged. He said, "Are you okay?" She shook her head. They entered the courtyard. There were 6 floors of apartments. Fraera had occupied several apartments, spread across various floors, each put to a different use. There was a small printing press, producing leaflets and posters. In another apartment, there were stocks of guns and munitions. A third apartment served as a meeting place to eat and sleep and discuss. Entering the communal apartment, Zoya was surprised by the number of people, far more than usual. On one side were Hungarian men and women, most aged in their 20s, arguing passionately. On the other side were the vori. Most had not made the journey from Moscow to Budapest, remaining behind, preferring the certainty of the criminal underworld. They didn't understand the deal Fraera had made with Panin. They couldn't conceive of a life outside of Russia. Only a small number of her most ardent supports had followed her, partly out of loyalty, mostly because they knew no other Vori gang in Moscow would want them. From 15, only 4 remained. Fraera was in the middle of the room, in between the two groups, listening even when Hungarian was being spoken, sensitive to body language and gestures. She saw Zoya immediately, spotting her distress. "What happened?" Zoya explained. Fraera's eyes came alive, turning around, addressing her translator, a Hungarian student named Suzolt Polgar. "Find as many Hungarian flags as you can. Cut the hammer and sickle out of them, so that there is a hole in the middle. This is the symbol we've been waiting for." Fraera had no interest in the woman who'd risked her life to save Zoya. Upset, Zoya left the apartment. She leaned against the balcony rail. Melish joined her. He lit a cigarette, a habit he'd copied from the other Vori. She took the cigarette from his lips, stubbing it out under her foot. "It makes you smell." She regretted her words. The smoke did make him smell. It made him smell like all the other Vori. But she hadn't meant to embarrass him. Hurt, he slid off the rail, sulking back inside the apartment. She needed to remember that he was not her little sister to boss around. At the memory of Elena, guilt clutched her throat like a hand. She'd contemplated her decision countless times. Had she not joined Fraera, she would have been killed. Yet the truth was that she had wanted to leave, to run away. Had there been a free choice, had Fraera offered her a chance to go home or come with her, she would have left her little sister behind. You're angry. Startled, she faced Fraera. Although they'd lived together for months, Fraera remained intimidating and inaccessible, more like a source of energy than a person. Zoya composed herself. The woman with the flag saved me. There's a chance she'll die for it. Zoya, you should prepare yourself. Many innocent people are about to lose their lives. Same day. Descending the stairway and leaving the courtyard, Fraera checked that no one had seen her. It was late at night. The streets were empty. There was no sign of the AVH officers that Zoya had described. Fraera set off, frequently stopping with calculated abruptness, turning around and making sure that she wasn't being followed. She trusted no one, including her supporters. The workers, students, and representatives of various underground anti-Soviet resistance movements were indulgent and impractical, preoccupied with irrelevant theoretical debates. It would be easy for the AVH to infiltrate their ranks. They'd be too self-absorbed to notice the signals, putting all of them in danger. They'd be too self-absorbed to notice the signals, putting all of them in danger. Despite Fraera being here under Frol Penin's instructions, the AVH knew nothing of her operations. If she were caught, she would be shot. No one outside of the conspirators in Moscow had been trusted with information regarding the plans to trigger an uprising. If her dissident supporters found out that she was simultaneously working with Soviet ministers, they'd kill her. Bending down, Fraera scooped up a leaflet fluttering in the gutter. A copy of the revised 16 points. 16 demands for change. The points had been formulated yesterday afternoon in a crowded meeting at the Technological University. Unable to pass for a student, Fraera had loitered outside. When she'd heard that the intention of the meeting was to debate whether the students should leave DISZ, the Campus Communist Party organization, as a protest against their Soviet rulers, she'd decried their lack of ambition, encouraging her student acquaintances to divert the discussion onto bolder issues. Fraera had been working in this fashion for the past 4 months, applying pressure, offering material support, and stoking resentment against the occupation as best she could. While the anger was real and deep, she'd struggled to convert sentiment into direct action. There was only so much she could do herself. Her role was to professionalize amateur dissident. Yesterday, finally, there had been success. With a determination and clarity that surprised Fraera, the students had distilled their debate into 16 points. We demand the immediate withdrawal of all Soviet troops in accordance with the declaration of the peace treaty. On the scruffy handwritten notes carried out from the hall, that demand had been ranked fourth. Fraera had hurried back to her apartment, transcribing the notes and making one amendment, placing the demand for Soviet troop withdrawal at the top. Within hours, her Vori were handing out revised copies interlaced with the most provocative extracts from the secret speech. Outside of the few Vori, the remnants of her gang, Fraera's closest associate was Zsolt Polgar, her translator, an engineering student she'd met in a revolutionary underground bar located in a factory basement. With low ceilings that were never visible because of the thick haze of cigarette smoke, Fraera had found the venue's population rich in ambition. Zsolt, the son of a wealthy Hungarian diplomat, destined for power and money, were he only to conform to the Soviet occupation and find his place within it, spoke fluent Russian and Hungarian, and had quickly become Fraera's most valued intermediary. She humored him, slept with him, beguiling him with stories of her ruthlessness. Appreciating his skills, she flattered him as a libertarian and revolutionary. In reality, she saw him as little more than a rebellious young man, kicking out against his father, whom he despised as a sycophantic Soviet appeaser. Regardless of his motivation, he was brave and idealistic, easy to manipulate. He had suggested a demonstration in support of the 16 points, an inspired notion. As it happened, the idea had been duplicated around the city, and Fraera wondered if that might be the work of one of Panin's other cells. Either way, the result was that tomorrow 2 marches would be set out at the same time, one from either side of the city, joining at Palfi Square. There had been previous shows of disquiet in the capital, none of which had amounted to anything. Fraera was certain that only when people were standing side by side, feeding off each other, was there any chance that the underbelly of anger would transform, like a pupa to a butterfly, from bitter obedience into glorious violence. Reaching the Astoria Hotel, several blocks from her apartments, Fraera took a moment to observe the crossroads before glancing up at the hotel's top floor window. In the last window along, on the corner, a red candle was burning, the quaint signal that she devised. In this context, it meant she was to come upstairs. Moving around to the back of the hotel, entering through the deserted kitchens, she climbed to the top floor, walking to the room at the far end of the corridor. She knocked. A guard opened the door, gun drawn. There was a second guard behind him. She stepped into the suite, frisked before being ushered next door. Seated at the table, glancing out the window like a contemplative poet, was Frol Panin. An alliance with Panin, or any man like him, had never been part of Fraera's plans. Arriving in Moscow, she'd accepted that unless she was content with merely plunging a knife in Leo's back, she needed assistance. Similarly, Budapest had never been part of her plans. It was another improvisation. With the illusion of Zoya's death, her original ambition to bring ruin down on Leo's hopes of happiness had been achieved. Leo was tortured as she'd been tortured. The loss of a son paid for with the loss of a daughter. He was broken, forced to live with grief, and not even allowed the fire of righteousness indignation that had sustained her through those same emotions. Her revenge complete, she'd been faced with the decision of what to do next. It had become apparent that she couldn't untangle herself from Panin and melt away. If she stopped being useful to him, he would order her death. If she escaped, it would be a life of wealth and growing old, a life she had no interest in. Hearing of his international operations, his attempts to agitate disturbances within the Soviet bloc, she volunteered herself and her men. Panin had been skeptical, but Freire had pointed out that she was likely to make a far more convincing agitator against Soviet Russia than the loyal KGB agents he was using. Panin offered his hand, a polite, formal gesture that she found absurd. Nevertheless, she shook it. He smiled. "I've flown over to monitor progress. Our troops are in position on the border. They have been for some time. Yet there is nothing for them to do. You'll get your uprising. It needs to happen now. It is of no use to me a year from now. We're on the brink. My other cells have had considerably more success than you. Poland, for example. The riots you instigated in Poznan were crushed with no serious loss of face for Khrushchev. They did not have the impact you required. Otherwise, you wouldn't be bothering with Budapest." Panin nodded, admiring Freire's gift for weighing up situations exactly. She was right. Khrushchev's plan to scale back the conventional military had not been derailed. They were a central platform for his reforms. He had argued that the Soviet Union no longer needed so many tanks and troops. Instead, they had a nuclear deterrent and were building an experimental missile delivery system that required no more than a handful of engineers and scientists, not millions of soldiers. Panin considered the policy foolhardiness of the most dangerous kind. Aside from the inadequacies of the missiles, Khrushchev had fundamentally misunderstood the importance of the military, just as he'd misunderstood the impact of his secret speech. The military existed not solely to protect against internal aggressors. Its purpose was to hold the Soviet Union together. The glue between the nations of the Soviet bloc wasn't ideology, but tanks and troops and planes. His proposed cuts combined with the reckless sabotage inflicted by his speech were putting their nation in peril. Panin and his allies were arguing that not only must they maintain the size of the conventional army, but they must also extend and rearm it. They must increase spending, not decrease it. A disturbance in Budapest, or indeed in any other East European city, would prove that the entire fabric of the revolution depended upon its conventional military might, not merely its nuclear arsenal. Several million men with rifles were useful in reminding the population, at home and abroad, who was in control. Panin said, "What news do you have for me?" Freire handed him the leaflet printed with the 16 points. "There is going to be a demonstration tomorrow." Panin glanced at the sheet of paper. "What does it say?" "The first demand is for Soviet troops to leave the country. It is a call for freedom. And we can trace this inspiration back to the speech?" "Certainly. But the demonstration won't be enough. What else do you need? A guarantee that you will fire upon the crowd." Panin placed the leaflet on the desk. "I'll see what I can do." "You must succeed. Despite everything these people have been through, the arrests, the executions, they will not become violent unless provoked. They are not like us. Ready to leave, Fra Era hesitated by the door, turning back to face Panin. Was there anything else? Panin shook his head. No, nothing else.